My children said I wasn't needed anymore. Until they lost everything. Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together, we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. They say that being a mother is the most natural thing in the world, that the love flows automatically, unconditionally, endlessly. What they don't tell you is that sometimes that endless love can become a river that floods its banks, drowning everything in its path, including yourself. My name is Margaret, and for 43 years, I have been a mother above all else. Not Margaret the woman, not Margaret the dreamer, not Margaret who once wanted to be a teacher, or Margaret who loved to paint watercolor landscapes on Sunday afternoons. Just Margaret the mother, whose entire existence revolved around 3 small humans who came into this world depending on me for everything. I remember the night Emma was born, my first, my miracle. The labor lasted 18 hours, and when they finally placed her in my arms, this tiny wrinkled creature with David's stubborn chin and my wide eyes, I felt something inside me shift permanently. It wasn't just love, it was transformation. In that moment, I stopped being me and became hers. 2 years later came Michael, all 10 pounds of him, born 3 weeks early and determined to make his presence known from day one. Where Emma had been a quiet baby, content to observe the world with serious eyes, Michael was motion and noise and endless energy. I learned to function on 3 hours of sleep, to change diapers while bouncing a crying baby, to make dinner with one hand while holding a toddler with the other. And then Sarah, my unexpected gift at 38. The pregnancy was difficult, the delivery complicated, and the doctors warned me that she might not make it through her first week. But Sarah, like her siblings, was a fighter. She proved them all wrong, growing into a spirited child who could charm her way out of any trouble and into anyone's heart. 3 children in 6 years. 3 completely different personalities that somehow fit together like pieces of a puzzle I was constantly rearranging. David tried to help, but his job at the insurance company required long hours and frequent travel. Looking back now, I think he was grateful to have an excuse to escape the chaos of our house. He loved his children, but from a distance, in the abstract way some men love, proudly, but not practically. So it fell to me. All of it. The midnight feedings and the potty training disasters. The scraped knees and the broken hearts. The science fair projects started at 9 p.m. the night before they were due. The birthday parties where I made elaborate cakes from scratch because store-bought felt like giving up. The Christmas mornings where I stayed up until 3 a.m. assembling toys because seeing their faces light up was worth more than sleep. I took a job at the local grocery store when Emma started kindergarten, working nights so I could be home during the day. Then, I added weekend shifts at a diner when Michael wanted to play Little League and we needed money for equipment and fees. I wore the same 3 dresses to parent-teacher conferences for years, rotating them so the teachers might not notice, always making sure my children had new clothes for school pictures, even if I looked tired and worn in the background. When Emma was 12, she went through a phase where she hated her curly hair. She would spend hours in front of the mirror, crying because she thought she looked ugly. I saved up for 2 months to buy her a hair straightener, and then spent another month learning how to use it properly so I could do her hair every morning before school. 45 minutes every single day, standing behind her at the bathroom mirror, carefully straightening each section while she told me about her dreams and fears and the boy she had a crush on. Those were the moments I treasured, not the big milestones, though those were precious too, but the quiet, ordinary moments when my children trusted me with their secrets. Michael telling me about the bullies at school while I helped him with homework at the kitchen table. Sarah crawling into my bed during thunderstorms, her small body pressed against mine as I stroked her hair and hummed lullabies until the storm passed. I gave up painting when Emma was 3 and my art supplies became too tempting for little hands. I gave up my book club when Michael started playing soccer and needed rides to practice 3 times a week. I gave up my friendship with Linda next door because our phone conversations were constantly interrupted by one crisis or another, and eventually she stopped calling. But I didn't mind. I told myself I didn't mind. This was motherhood, wasn't it? The beautiful sacrifice, the noble calling. My children needed me, and being needed felt like purpose. When David left, Emma was 16, Michael 14, Sarah 8. I thought the world was ending. He sat the children down on a Tuesday evening in March and explained, in his calm, reasonable way, that Mommy and Daddy had grown apart, that sometimes adults needed to make difficult choices, that this didn't change how much he loved them. What he didn't say was that he'd been having an affair with his secretary for 2 years. What he didn't say was that I'd known about it for 6 months and had been begging him to try counseling, to think about our family, to remember the life we'd built together. What he didn't say was that loving his children from a distance was easier than loving his wife up close. The divorce was brutal. He fought me on alimony, claiming I was perfectly capable of supporting myself. He was right, in a way. I had been supporting myself, and them, for years. But now, I was doing it completely alone, with 3 children who suddenly needed me more than ever. Emma became angry and withdrawn, slamming doors and screaming that I had driven Daddy away. Michael started getting into fights at school, his grades dropping as he struggled to process emotions he didn't understand. Sarah, my baby, began having nightmares and refused to sleep in her own bed for months. I worked double shifts at the diner and picked up cleaning jobs on the weekends. I learned to fix leaky faucets and unclog drains because calling a plumber wasn't in the budget. I stretched hamburger meat with breadcrumbs and beans, made soup from scratch because canned was too expensive, darned socks because new ones were a luxury. But I also made sure Emma had a dress for prom, sewing it myself from a pattern I found at the library. I made sure Michael had cleats for basketball season, even if it meant eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every day for a month. I made sure Sarah never missed a field trip or a class party, even when the permission slips felt like small financial disasters. Gradually, we found our rhythm. Emma's anger softened into protective fierceness. She became my ally, helping with Sarah, standing up for our little family against the whispers and pitying looks from neighbors. Michael channeled his fighting into sports, earning a scholarship to college that made me cry with pride and relief. Sarah bloomed into a confident, compassionate young woman who seemed determined to make up for all the sadness she'd witnessed as a child. I was so proud of them, so proud of how they'd survived, how they'd thrived despite everything. I told myself that every sacrifice had been worth it when I watched Emma graduate summa cum laude from college, when Michael received his engineering degree, when Sarah was accepted into veterinary school. They were going to be okay. More than okay. They were going to be successful, happy, fulfilled in ways I had never managed to be. And someday, when I was older and needed them, they would remember everything I had given up for them. They would take care of me the way I had taken care of them. That was the unspoken contract, wasn't it? The promise that made all the sacrifice worthwhile. You pour your life into your children, and in return, they love you forever. They remember. They're grateful. They make sure you're not alone when your hair turns gray and your hands shake and you can't remember where you put your keys. Emma was the first to move away, accepting a job in Seattle with a tech company. She called every Sunday for the first year, sharing stories about her new apartment, her demanding boss, the coffee shops she'd discovered. I lived for those calls, hoarding details about her life like a miser hoarding coins. But gradually, the calls became shorter, less frequent. She was busy, she explained. New projects at work. She'd started dating someone, Ryan, a lawyer with ambitions and a wine collection. She sounded different when she talked about him, more sophisticated somehow, using words and references I didn't understand. When she brought him home for Christmas that first year, I could see her watching me through his eyes, noticing, perhaps for the first time, how small our house was, how worn the furniture looked, how my hands were permanently stained from years of cleaning other people's homes. Ryan was polite but distant, making conversation about subjects I knew nothing about, clearly counting the minutes until they could leave. Michael found work in Chicago, designing bridges and highways for a prestigious firm. He had always been my quiet one, content to show love through actions rather than words, but now even his actions felt different. He sent money on my birthday and Mother's Day, generous amounts that made me grateful and uncomfortable in equal measure. When I thanked him, he would brush off my gratitude with an awkward laugh, as if my thanks embarrassed him. Sarah, my baby, was the last to go. Veterinary school in Colorado, then a residency in Denver. She had always been the most affectionate of my children, the one who still hugged me goodbye, who remembered little details about my life and asked about them. But even she seemed to be drifting away, her visits home becoming shorter and more infrequent. I told myself it was natural. This was what I had raised them for: independence, success, their own lives. I should be proud that they didn't need me anymore. I should be happy that the scared, angry children who had clung to me after their father left had grown into confident adults who could take care of themselves. But in the quiet of my empty house, with only the ticking of the clock and the hum of the refrigerator for company, I felt lost. Who was I, if not their mother? What was my purpose now that they were gone? I tried to rebuild my own life. I took art classes at the community center, picking up a paintbrush for the first time in 20 years. My hands remembered the motion, the way to blend colors and create light, but the joy felt forced, artificial. I joined a book club, but found myself making excuses to skip meetings. I even went on a few dates with men I met at church or through friends, but sitting across from strangers and trying to explain who I was beyond mother of three felt impossible. The phone calls from my children became perfunctory, quick check-ins where they asked if I was okay, if I needed anything, if I was staying healthy. When I tried to extend the conversations, to ask about their work or their relationships or their dreams, they would find reasons to cut them short. Too busy, too tired, too distracted by their important adult lives. Emma married Ryan in a small ceremony in Seattle. I flew out for the wedding, spending money I couldn't afford on a dress and a gift, determined to be the proud mother of the bride. But I felt like an outsider at my own daughter's wedding, surrounded by Ryan's family and their successful friends, people who spoke casually about their vacation homes and their children's private schools. During the reception, I overheard Emma talking to one of Ryan's colleagues, a woman with perfectly styled hair and expensive jewelry. They were discussing their careers, their plans for the future, the challenges of balancing ambition with family life. "My mother never worked," Emma said, and I could hear something in her voice I'd never heard before. Embarrassment? Dismissal? "She was just a housewife, you know, very traditional. I always knew I wanted something different for myself." Just a housewife. The words hit me like a physical blow. I wanted to interrupt, to remind her of the grocery store job, the diner shifts, the cleaning houses on weekends. I wanted to tell this stranger about the nights I stayed up sewing Emma's clothes, the mornings I braided her hair while she told me her secrets, the years I worked 2 jobs to pay for her college. But I said nothing. I smiled and made small talk and pretended I hadn't heard my daughter reduce 40 years of sacrifice to just a housewife. Michael got engaged to Jennifer, a fellow engineer who spoke in precise technical terms about everything from their investment portfolio to their 5-year plan. They bought a house in a suburb I couldn't afford to visit more than once a year, with a guest room that was clearly designed for overnight stays, not extended visits. When I did visit, I felt like I was walking on eggshells. Jennifer was kind but formal, calling me Mrs. Patterson, even after I asked her to call me Margaret. She would ask polite questions about my life, then nod with the sort of patient attention you might give a child recounting their day at school. Michael seemed different around her, more serious, more concerned with appearing successful and sophisticated. When I mentioned memories from his childhood, he would change the subject quickly, as if those stories were embarrassing reminders of a past he'd rather forget. Sarah, at least, still seemed to remember who I was, who we had been together. She would call and talk for hours sometimes, telling me about difficult cases at the veterinary clinic, asking for advice about relationships and career decisions. But even she was changing, influenced by new friends and colleagues who came from different worlds than ours. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday in October. I had been having chest pains for a week. Nothing dramatic, just a persistent ache that made me worry enough to see Dr. Morrison, who had been taking care of me for 20 years. After some tests, he called with news that made my world tilt sideways. "Margaret, the good news is it's not your heart," he said in his reassuring doctor voice. "But we found something else, a mass in your left lung. We need to do more tests, but I want you to be prepared for the possibility that this could be serious." I sat in my kitchen afterward, staring at the phone in my hands, trying to process what he had told me. Cancer. Maybe. The word hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. I called Emma first. It went to voicemail. She was in a meeting, according to the automated message. I left a brief message asking her to call me back, that I had some news to share. Michael's phone also went to voicemail. I left the same message, trying to keep my voice steady. Sarah answered on the third ring. "Hi, Mom, I'm just running between appointments, but I have a few minutes. What's up?" "Sarah, honey, I need to tell you something. I went to the doctor today and—" "Mom, I'm so sorry, but I have to go. Mrs. Henderson's cat needs emergency surgery, and I'm the only one available. Can I call you tonight?" "But Sarah, this is—" "I promise I'll call later, love you." The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. Here I was, possibly facing cancer. And my children, the children I had devoted my entire existence to, were too busy to talk to me. Emma called back 3 days later. "Sorry, Mom, work has been insane. What did you want to talk about?" I told her about the doctor, the tests, the possibility of cancer. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Oh," she said finally. "Well, I'm sure it's nothing serious. You've always been healthy. When will you know more?" "Next week." "Emma, I was wondering, if it is serious, if I need treatment, could I—" "Mom, let's not borrow trouble, okay? Wait until you have real information before you start panicking. I have to run, Ryan, and I are meeting his parents for dinner." Michael was equally dismissive when I finally reached him. "You're probably overreacting, Mom. Remember when you thought you had that heart attack, and it was just anxiety? Let's wait and see what the tests say." Sarah was more sympathetic, but equally practical. "I wish I could be there with you, Mom, but I'm in the middle of a really important rotation. Keep me posted, okay?" The tests came back positive. Stage 2 lung cancer, treatable but requiring surgery and chemotherapy. When I called to tell them, their reactions were variations on the same theme. Sympathy tempered by distance, love filtered through the lens of their own busy lives. "Of course we'll help however we can," Emma said. "But you understand that I can't take time off work right now. We're in the middle of a major product launch." "I'll send money for whatever you need," Michael offered. "Good health insurance, right? Maybe a private nurse." "I can come for the surgery," Sarah promised, "but I'll have to go back right after. I can't afford to miss too much of my rotation." I realized, with a clarity that was both liberating and devastating, that they saw me as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be cared for. They were willing to throw money at my situation, to hire professionals to handle the messy business of my illness, but they weren't willing to be present for it themselves. The surgery went well, but the recovery was harder than I had expected. Sarah stayed for 3 days, hovering nervously around my bed, clearly uncomfortable with the role of caregiver. She had never seen me weak before, had never had to help me to the bathroom or watch me struggle to eat. When she left, I could see relief in her eyes, as if she was escaping something unpleasant. Emma sent flowers. Michael sent a gift basket. They called dutifully every few days to check on my progress, but the conversations were brief and awkward. They didn't know how to talk to a sick mother. They had only ever known me as the strong one, the one who took care of everyone else. I hired a home health aide with money I couldn't afford because the alternative was asking my children to help, and I had finally understood that they didn't want to be asked. During those long weeks of recovery, I had too much time to think. I replayed years of conversations, interactions, moments when I should have seen the signs that I was becoming irrelevant to them. The way Emma had started asking about my financial situation, not out of concern, but to make sure I wasn't going to become a burden. The way Michael had stopped inviting me to visit for major holidays, claiming their house was too small for guests. The way Sarah had begun treating our conversations like obligations rather than pleasures. I remembered a conversation with Emma from the previous Christmas. I had been telling her about my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who had moved in with her daughter after her husband died. "I hope I never have to do that," Emma had said, not looking at me. "I mean, I hope Mrs. Chen is happy, but I think it's so important for people to maintain their independence as they age. Don't you think?" At the time, I had agreed, thinking she was talking about Mrs. Chen. Now I realized she had been talking about me, setting boundaries I hadn't even known existed. The chemotherapy was brutal. Weeks of nausea and fatigue, of watching my hair fall out in clumps, of feeling like a stranger in my own body. My children called more frequently during this period, their guilt apparently triggered by the word chemotherapy. But even their increased attention felt hollow. They wanted updates on my treatment, but not on how I was feeling. They asked about my doctors, but not about my fears. They sent care packages filled with expensive items I didn't need, instead of offering the one thing I wanted most: their presence. It was during the 4th round of chemo, when I was at my sickest and most vulnerable, that the conversation happened that would change everything between us forever. I had called Emma, hoping for distraction from the nausea and the bone-deep exhaustion that made even breathing feel difficult. I had been looking forward to the call all day, planning things to ask her about, stories to share that might make her laugh. "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling?" "Better today," I lied. "The new anti-nausea medication seems to be helping. How are you?" "How's the new project going?" "Good, good. Listen, Mom, I'm glad you called. Ryan and I have been talking, and we think it might be time for you to consider some changes." Something in her tone made my stomach clench, with more than chemo-induced nausea. "What kind of changes?" "Well, you're dealing with a serious illness, and you're getting older, and we think it might be safer for you to be in a place where there are professionals who can take care of you if something happens." "A place? What kind of place?" "There are some really nice assisted living communities in your area. I've been doing research, and some of them have excellent medical facilities. You could have your own apartment, but with help available if you need it." The words hit me like ice water. "Emma, I'm 58 years old. I'm not ready for assisted living." "But you're sick, Mom, and you live alone. What if something happens? What if you fall or have a reaction to your medication? We worry about you." "Then come stay with me. Take turns. Help me through this. I helped all of you through much worse things when you were children." There was a long pause. When Emma spoke again, her voice was carefully patient, as if she were explaining something to a child. "Mom, that's not really practical. We all have our own lives now, our own responsibilities. We can't drop everything every time you need something. That's not how adult families work." "Adult families," I repeated slowly. "Is that what we are now?" "I just mean that everyone has to take care of themselves. We can help you financially, and we can visit when we can. But we can't be your primary support system. That's not fair to us." Not fair to them. I had spent 40 years making sure life was fair for them, sacrificing my own needs and dreams and desires so they could have everything they wanted. And now, when I needed them for the first time in their adult lives, they were telling me it wouldn't be fair. "So what you're saying," I said carefully, "is that you think I should move to assisted living so you don't have to worry about taking care of me." "That's not how I would put it." How would you put it? Another pause. I could almost hear her choosing her words, trying to find a way to make abandonment sound like love. I would say that we think you'd be happier and safer in an environment where you're not dependent on us for everything, where you could make friends with people your own age, participate in activities, have medical care readily available. It would be good for you, Mom. It would give you independence. Independence. They were taking away my home, my autonomy, my connection to them, and calling it independence. And if I don't want to go? If I want to stay in my own home and fight this cancer in the place where I raised you children? The silence stretched between us, filled with everything she wasn't saying. Mom, be reasonable. You can't expect us to rearrange our entire lives because you're sick. We have careers, marriages, responsibilities. You are my children, I interrupted, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks. I am your mother. When you were sick, when you were scared, when you needed me, I didn't tell you to be reasonable. I didn't explain that I had other responsibilities. I took care of you because that's what love is. That was different. We were children then. And I'm your mother now. That doesn't change just because you grew up. Mom! Emma's voice was getting strained, frustrated. Look, we've already made some calls. There's a place called Sunset Manor that has an opening next month. It's very nice, and the medical facilities are excellent. We think you should at least look at it. You and your brothers decided this without talking to me? We've all been concerned. Concerned enough to plan my life for me, but not concerned enough to be part of it. That's not fair. There it was again. Fairness. As if the ledger of love could be balanced like a checkbook. As if 40 years of devotion could be canceled out by a few months of inconvenience. You want to know what's not fair, Emma? What's not fair is that I gave you everything I had. My youth, my dreams, my health, my energy. I gave it all to you and your brothers. I worked 2 jobs so you could have piano lessons. I stayed up all night when you had pneumonia. I sewed your prom dress because buying one would have meant Michael couldn't play basketball. My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. I sacrificed friendships and hobbies and relationships because you needed me. I turned down job opportunities and moved to school districts I couldn't afford because it was what was best for you. I lived on peanut butter sandwiches so you could have name-brand shoes. Mom, we never asked you to do any of that. You didn't have to ask. You were my children. That's what mothers do. They give everything they have so their children can have better lives. And I was happy to do it because I believed. My voice cracked. I believed that someday, when I was old and sick and needed you, you would remember. You would love me enough to sacrifice for me the way I sacrificed for you. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. But you don't remember, do you? I continued, tears streaming down my face now. You don't remember the nights I walked the floor with you when you had colic. You don't remember that I worked at a diner until 2 a.m. so you could go to college without student loans. You don't remember that I gave up every dream I ever had because being your mother was more important than being anything else. Mom, please don't be dramatic. Dramatic? You think this is dramatic? Emma, you are 41 years old and you have never once, not once, asked me what I wanted, what I dreamed about, what would make me happy. You've never asked me about my art, my interests, my hopes for my own life. You've never seen me as anything other than your mother, and now that you don't need mothering anymore, you've decided I'm irrelevant. That's not true. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked me about something that wasn't related to my health or my living situation? When was the last time you called because you wanted to hear my voice, not because you felt obligated to check on me? Emma was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and defensive. I don't know what you want from us, Mom. We're busy. We have our own families to think about. We can't be everything to you. I don't want you to be everything to me, I said quietly. I just wanted to matter to you. I wanted to know that all those years meant something, that the woman who raised you still has value in your life beyond being a problem to be managed. You do matter to us. No, I don't. Not really. I'm a duty to you now, an obligation. You send money because it's easier than sending time. You make phone calls because you feel guilty, not because you miss me. You want to put me somewhere safe, so you don't have to worry about me interfering with your real lives. The conversation ended badly, with Emma making excuses to hang up and me sitting alone in my kitchen, shaking with anger and grief. Over the next few days, Michael and Sarah both called, clearly having been briefed by their sister. Their conversations were variations on the same theme. We love you, but we can't take care of you, so please be reasonable and let professionals do it. Michael was blunter than Emma had been. Mom, you're being selfish. We've all worked hard to build good lives, and you can't expect us to give that up because you're sick. That's not how modern families work. Sarah was more emotional, crying as she tried to explain that she wanted to help but couldn't see how. I'm just starting my career, Mom. If I take time off now, it could set me back years. And Jake and I are trying to get pregnant. We can't take on the stress of managing your care, too. Jake, Sarah's boyfriend of 18 months, who was already more important to her than the woman who had raised her. I realized, with painful clarity, that my children weren't cruel or heartless. They were simply people who had never learned that love requires sacrifice because they had never been asked to sacrifice anything. I had given them everything so freely that they didn't understand the cost. They had grown up believing that care and comfort and support were things that just happened, not things that had to be chosen and fought for and maintained. They loved me in their way, but their love was passive, dependent on convenience and comfort. They loved me when it was easy, when it didn't require them to give up anything important, when it didn't interfere with their plans. And now that loving me required actual sacrifice time, energy, disruption to their carefully planned lives, they had decided it was time for me to go somewhere else, to become someone else's responsibility. I spent the next few weeks in a strange state of limbo, going through the motions of recovery while feeling emotionally numb. My children called less frequently, apparently satisfied that the situation was being handled. I went through the motions of visiting Sunset Manor, mostly to prove to myself that their solution wasn't mine. The facility was nice enough, clean, well-staffed, filled with people my age who smiled politely and participated in organized activities. But it was a place for people who had been set aside, stored away until their children could deal with them. It was a place for mothers who had outlived their usefulness. I was still trying to decide what to do when everything changed. It started with a phone call from Jennifer, Michael's wife now. I'd missed the small ceremony they'd had without telling me until afterward. Mrs. Patterson? Her voice was shaky, uncertain. I'm sorry to bother you, but I didn't know who else to call. Michael, something's happened. The firm where Michael worked had been involved in a major scandal-falsified safety reports on a bridge project that had led to a collapse, thank God with no fatalities, but with massive legal and financial repercussions. Michael, as the senior engineer on the project, was facing criminal charges, civil lawsuits, and the destruction of his career. He won't talk to anyone, Jennifer said, crying now. He just sits in his office staring at the wall. We've lost most of our savings on legal fees, and I don't know what we're going to do. I know things have been difficult between you all lately, but could you maybe talk to him? He won't listen to me. I drove to Chicago despite being barely recovered from my last chemo treatment, despite having no money for gas or hotel rooms, despite not having been invited to their house in over a year. I found my son broken in a way I hadn't seen since he was 14, and his father had walked out. Michael broke down when he saw me, sobbing in my arms like the little boy he used to be. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix this. We sat at his kitchen table, the expensive granite table in the expensive house that was about to be taken away, and I listened while he told me about the pressure he'd been under, the corners he'd been encouraged to cut, the way success had become more important than integrity until he'd lost track of both. I thought I was so smart, he said, his face buried in his hands. I thought I had everything figured out. I looked down on you, on the way you lived, on the choices you made. I was embarrassed by you, Mom. Embarrassed by our old house, and your secondhand clothes, and the fact that you cleaned other people's homes to pay for my education. The admission hung between us, brutal in its honesty. And now I've lost everything. My job, our house, my reputation. Jennifer's talking about leaving, and I don't blame her. I don't have anything left to be proud of. I reached across the table and took his hands in mine hands that were soft and uncalloused, so different from my own work-worn ones. You have me, I said simply. You'll always have me. He cried harder then, and I held him the way I had when he was small, and the world seemed too big and too scary to navigate alone. 2 weeks later, Sarah called in hysterics. The veterinary clinic where she was doing her residency had been shut down by the state for violations of animal welfare laws. Worse, Sarah had been the one to discover and report the violations, which had made her a whistleblower, but had also effectively ended her career in veterinary medicine before it had truly begun. No one will hire me now, she sobbed over the phone. They're calling me a traitor, saying I destroyed an institution. Jake says I should have kept quiet, that I was naive to think doing the right thing would protect me. He's asked for his ring back, Mom. He says he can't marry someone who's going to be a liability to his career. And then came Emma. My successful, sophisticated Emma, who had built her life so carefully, who had married the right man and climbed the corporate ladder, and never looked back at the small house where she'd grown up. The tech company she worked for had been involved in a massive data breach, and Emma, as the project manager for the compromise system, was being made the scapegoat. But worse than losing her job was losing Ryan, who had filed for divorce the moment the scandal broke, claiming he couldn't be married to someone whose reputation might damage his political ambitions. I don't understand how this happened, she said when she called, her voice hollow with shock. I did everything right. I worked harder than anyone. I married the right person. I built the right kind of life. How did it all fall apart so quickly? One by one, my successful, independent children found their way back to my door. Not physically, not yet. They were still too proud, too embarrassed by their failures to actually come home. But emotionally, spiritually, they were reaching for me like drowning people, reaching for a life preserver. And I had a choice to make. I could welcome them back with open arms, the way I always had. I could let them cry on my shoulder and move back into their childhood rooms and start over from the safety of their mother's love. I could go back to being the woman who gave everything, sacrificed everything, existed only to make their lives easier. Or I could do something I had never done before in my entire life as a mother. I could set boundaries. The first time Michael asked if he could move back home, just until I get back on my feet, I said no. The silence on the other end of the phone was complete. No? He repeated, as if he'd never heard the word from me before. No, Michael, you can't move back home. But Mom, I don't have anywhere else to go. Jennifer left. The house is being foreclosed on. I've lost everything. Please. The desperation in his voice broke my heart, but I held firm. Michael, I love you. I will always love you. But I cannot be your solution to every problem anymore. What do you mean? You're my mother. Yes, I am. And for 40 years, I have been nothing but your mother. I have given you everything I had, and when you no longer needed it, you told me I wasn't needed anymore. You wanted me to go to assisted living, so I wouldn't be inconvenient for you. That was different. No, it wasn't. You made it clear that love, in your mind, is conditional on convenience. Well, now I'm learning to love you the same way. I took a breath, gathering strength I didn't know I possessed. You can't move back home because this isn't your home anymore, Michael. It's mine. For the first time in my adult life, this house is just mine, and I'm not ready to give that up again. So you're just going to let me be homeless? Your own son? I'm going to let you be an adult. I'm going to trust that the man I raised has the strength and intelligence to figure out his own life, the way millions of people do every day. The conversation with Sarah was similar, though she cried more. But Mom, I don't understand. I need you. Isn't that what you always wanted? I wanted you to love me, Sarah. Needing me isn't the same thing. Of course I love you. Do you? Because 3 months ago, when I needed you, you told me you were too busy to help. You wanted to put me in assisted living because taking care of me would interfere with your career plans. Now that your career is gone and your fiancé has left you, suddenly you remember you have a mother? That's not fair. No, it's not. None of this is fair, sweetheart. But I'm 58 years old. I'm recovering from cancer, and I'm finally learning to take care of myself first. I can't go back to being the woman who gives everything away. Emma was the hardest, because Emma was the angriest. She accused me of being vindictive, of punishing them for their success, of abandoning them when they needed me most. You're being cruel, she said. This isn't like you at all. You're right, I agreed. This isn't like me. The old me would have already cleaned out my savings account to help you, would have opened my doors and my heart and asked no questions. The old me would have sacrificed whatever was left of my life to fix yours. So what changed? I learned that my children don't actually love me. They love what I can do for them. And I finally decided I deserve better than that. The silence that followed was filled with everything we'd never said to each other. All the resentment and pain and disappointment that had been building for years. So what happens now? Emma asked finally. We just don't have a relationship anymore? That depends on you, I said. All 3 of you. I'm not closing my door forever, but I'm not opening it unconditionally either. If you want me in your life, you need to figure out how to love me when I can't give you anything. You need to learn how to give instead of just take. What do you mean? I mean that for the next 6 months, I don't want to hear from any of you unless you have something to offer me. Not money, I don't want your money. But a phone call just to see how I'm doing. A visit that isn't about asking for something. A conversation where you ask about my interests, my feelings, my life beyond being your mother. That's ridiculous. Is it? Emma, you're 41 years old. In all these years, have you ever once asked me what my favorite movie is? What I wanted to be when I was your age? What I dream about now? Have you ever asked me about my art, my friends, my hopes for the future? She was quiet. You want to know what's ridiculous? I know everything about your life, your favorite foods, your fears, your dreams, your disappointments. I know that you hate the smell of vanilla candles and that you cry during commercials about dogs. I know that you still sleep with a nightlight when Ryan travels and that you worry about whether you're smart enough for your job. My voice grew stronger as I continued. But you don't know that I've been taking watercolor classes, or that I made a friend named Dorothy who makes me laugh until my sides hurt. You don't know that I dream about traveling to Italy someday, or that I've been writing poetry in the margins of my grocery lists. You don't know that I still miss your father sometimes, or that I'm proud of the woman I've become since you all left home. I could hear her crying softly on the other end of the line. If you want me back in your life, I said gently, you need to learn who I am beyond being your mother. You need to love Margaret the person, not just Margaret who fixes your problems. Over the next few months, I heard from each of them sporadically. Michael called once to tell me he'd found a job as a construction supervisor, a significant step down from his engineering career, but honest work that he seemed to be approaching with new humility. He didn't ask for anything, just shared the news and asked how my art classes were going. Sarah sent me a postcard from Montana, where she'd taken a job at a rural animal clinic. The pay is terrible and the hours are long, she wrote, but I'm helping animals again, and it feels good to do work that matters. How's your poetry coming? Emma was the most resistant, and it took 4 months before she called. When she did, it was awkward at first. She didn't know how to talk to me as a person, rather than as a problem solver. But gradually, carefully, we began to build something new. I found your old paintings in the attic, she said during one call. Mom, they're beautiful. I never knew you were so talented. Why did you stop? Because I was too busy being your mother to remember I was anything else, I said, not accusingly, but matter-of-factly. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I'm sorry we never asked. I'm sorry we never saw you. It wasn't easy, this process of rebuilding our relationships from scratch. There were setbacks and misunderstandings, moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. Michael struggled with his pride, finding it difficult to accept that his mother wouldn't automatically fix his problems. Sarah sometimes slipped back into treating me like a therapist rather than a person. Emma had to learn that vulnerability didn't make her weak, but slowly, gradually, something new began to emerge between us. Real conversations, built on mutual respect rather than obligation. Relationships where I was valued for who I was, not just what I could provide. 6 months after our confrontation, I invited them all for Christmas dinner. Not because they had nowhere else to go, they were all rebuilding their lives, finding their own paths, but because I wanted to spend the holiday with people I loved, who loved me back. Michael brought his new girlfriend, a teacher named Lisa, who asked me about my paintings and actually listened to the answers. Sarah came alone but confident, having found peace in her simpler life in Montana. Emma arrived with stories about starting her own consulting business, small but growing, built on values rather than ambition. We cooked dinner together, all of us crowded into my little kitchen, laughing and talking and actually enjoying each other's company. It was different from the Christmas dinners of their childhood, less elaborate, less focused on creating perfect memories, more focused on simply being together. After dinner, as we sat around the living room, drinking coffee and talking, Emma looked at the watercolor painting I had hanging above the fireplace, a landscape I'd painted from memory of a place we'd visited when she was 8. I remember that day, she said softly. We had a picnic by that lake, and you taught me how to skip stones. You were so frustrated because you couldn't get the angle right, I said, smiling at the memory. You were so patient with me. You must have shown me 100 times before I finally got it. I had time then, I said, all the time in the world for whatever you needed. I miss that sometimes, Michael said unexpectedly. Not being a kid again, exactly, but I miss believing that you would always be there to catch me if I fell. I am still here, I said. But I'm not going to catch you anymore. I'm going to trust that you're strong enough to catch yourself. What if we're not? Sarah asked. Then you'll learn to be. The same way I did. They stayed until late that evening, and when they finally left, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Contentment. Not the exhausted satisfaction of having given everything away, but the quiet pleasure of having chosen to share myself with people who valued what I offered. A year later, I sold my house, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I bought a small apartment in a building full of artists and writers and interesting people who had stories to tell. I set up an art studio in the second bedroom and finally hung my paintings on the walls. My relationship with my children continued to evolve. We spoke regularly now, but our conversations were balanced. They asked about my life as much as I asked about theirs. They visited, but as guests rather than as children coming home to be taken care of. They offered help when I needed it, but they also accepted help from me when it was appropriate. Most importantly, they had learned to love me as a whole person rather than just as their mother. They knew about my art and my friends and my dreams. They remembered my birthday not with expensive gifts, but with thoughtful ones' art supplies, books by authors I loved, tickets to exhibitions I'd mentioned wanting to see. It wasn't the relationship I had imagined when they were children, when I dreamed of being surrounded by adoring offspring who would care for me in my old age. It was better. It was real. It was based on choice rather than obligation, on respect rather than dependence. The night I finished my first real painting in 20 years, a self-portrait I called Margaret at 59. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone I had never seen before. Not a mother first and a woman second, but a person who happened to also be a mother. Someone who had value beyond what she could give away. I called Emma to tell her about the painting. I'd love to see it, she said. Could I come visit this weekend? I promise I'm not running away from anything. I actually have some good news to share. Of course, I said. I'll make dinner. You don't have to cook for me, Mom. We could go out, or I could bring something. It was a small thing, but it meant everything. She was thinking of me as a person who might be tired after a day of painting, who might want to be taken care of instead of always taking care of others. Actually, I said, I'd like to cook. I've been experimenting with new recipes, and I could use a taste tester. That sounds perfect. After we hung up, I sat in my studio surrounded by my paintings, some finished, some just begun, all of them mine. Outside my window, I could hear my neighbors coming and going, people who knew me as Margaret the artist, Margaret the friend, Margaret who made excellent coffee and always had interesting stories to tell. I thought about the woman I had been for so many years, the one who gave everything away, who defined herself entirely through her children's needs, who believed that love meant complete self-sacrifice. She wasn't a bad woman. She had loved deeply and given generously and raised 3 human beings who, despite their flaws, were fundamentally good people. But she had also been incomplete, diminished by her own generosity, exhausted by her own devotion. The woman I am now loves differently. I love my children fiercely, but I also love myself. I give generously, but I also receive graciously. I am still their mother, but I am also Margaret artist, friend, individual, person worthy of love and respect and attention. My children said I wasn't needed anymore, and in a way, they were right. They don't need the woman I used to be, the one who would give up everything for their comfort. But they do want the woman I've become, the one who loves them enough to teach them how to love in return. And that, I've learned, makes all the difference in the world. The cancer is in remission now. The doctors say I have years ahead of me, maybe decades. I plan to use them well painting and traveling and building relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided devotion. I plan to love deeply but not destructively, to give generously but not completely. I plan to be needed by people who deserve to need me and wanted by people who know the difference. My children learned eventually that love isn't something you can take for granted, that care isn't something that just happens, that relationships require effort from both sides. They learned it the hard way, by losing everything and discovering that the only person who still cared about them was the one they had taken most for granted. I hope they never forget that lesson. I hope they love their own children differently, fully, and completely, but not exclusively. I hope they remember that being a parent is important, but it shouldn't be the only thing that defines you. And I hope that when their children grow up and no longer need them the way they once did, my children will remember that love shouldn't end just because usefulness does. As for me, I'm learning every day what it means to be loved for who I am, rather than what I can provide. It's a different kind of love, less desperate, less consuming, but somehow deeper and more sustainable. My children said I wasn't needed anymore, and they broke my heart. But in the end, they gave me something more valuable than their need. They gave me the opportunity to discover that I was worth loving even when I had nothing left to give. And that knowledge, hard-won and precious, has set me free.